Welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Love and War Story. In today's story, humanity's first encounter in a galactic war will shatter the misconception that we are weak and unprepared. When the swarm threatens the galaxy, humanity's unexpected resilience and power will prove to be the game changer. Let's dive into the story. The resolute Victory drifted silently through the endless expanse of space, its massive hull gleaming under the light of distant stars. The interior of the ship was a labyrinth of metallic hallways, each more sterile than the last. The officers' lounge was the one place where the soldiers could feel a flicker of warmth, albeit artificial. It was here, in the softly lit chamber of quiet solitude, that Commander Zexter slowly entered. The hum of the ship's engines was a constant background murmur, but in the officers' lounge, a profound silence hung. Young soldiers turned their heads, eyes wide, as Zexter moved with the grace of a warrior forged in the fires of battle. His 7 limbs shifted fluidly, each one a testament to his many campaigns. His battlecar outer shell, a hardened exoskeleton, shimmered beneath the blue-green lights of the room, revealing the cracks and repairs that told the tale of a being who had weathered endless wars. His form was an enigma, a creature of strength, yet filled with an air of melancholy. The young soldiers stood at attention as he entered, but Zexter's voice broke the stillness. At ease, he grumbled, his voice like rough stones grinding together. "I came here to rest, not to bring more duty to your off hours." The officers relaxed slightly, but their curiosity remained. They had heard of Zexter, of course, the Galactic Coalition's most decorated war hero, leader of 12 major victories against the swarm. He was a living legend. And yet, he had a reputation for keeping to himself, rarely sharing his personal experiences. Zexter moved to the drink station and poured himself a steaming blue liquid, its vapors curling in the cool air. The drink was a peculiar blend of spices and minerals, and it was said to help calm the nerves of even the most battle-worn warriors. The room's occupants watched him with quiet awe, their many eyes blinking in various patterns, expressions of respect, fear, and intrigue. Finally, one of the younger officers, Vexili, couldn't hold back her curiosity. She approached Zexter with hesitant steps, her 3 battle honors glinting on her chest. Despite her own impressive achievements, she was still young, just in her 4th cycle of service. Yet here she stood, approaching a living legend. "Commander," she began, her voice reverberating slightly in the silence. "We would be honored to hear tales of your victories." The other officers gathered around, eager for an opportunity to hear from the legendary commander. They pulled chairs around the small table, eyes alight with hope and admiration. Zexter's eyes flickered toward them, and for a long moment, he seemed to contemplate their request. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, tinged with a hint of something deeper, something that hinted at the stories of war etched into his soul. "You want stories of victories?" Zexter said, his compound eyes darkening slightly. "There are many, it's true. But the ones that matter most are not about my battles. They're about the humans." At this, a quiet chuckle escaped one officer's lips. His shell was marked with bright red spots, and he shook his head in disbelief. "Humans," the officer scoffed. "The soft skins from that water world? What could they possibly do in war? They break so easily." Zexter's breathing slits narrowed. His gaze turned cold. That is exactly what the swarm thought when they first met the humans in battle. It was the worst mistake they ever made. The room grew quiet. The officers, who had once viewed humanity as weak, now leaned forward. Zexter continued, his voice taking on a tone of respect and warning. "Humans don't look dangerous. They have no natural armor, no claws or fangs, no poison. They can't breathe in space, and they cannot survive extreme temperatures without assistance. Their lives are short by our standards." He paused, locking eyes with each officer in turn. "But in all my years of fighting across 23 star systems, I have never seen anything that frightens me more than what humans become in war." The silence in the room deepened as the officers absorbed the weight of his words. Zexter's voice softened as he leaned forward slightly, speaking with a quiet intensity. "You think you know war," Zexter said. "You've studied tactics, you've fought battles. But you don't truly understand war until you've fought alongside humans, or worse, against them." Vexili, always eager to learn, spoke up, her voice trembling slightly with both fear and curiosity. What makes them so special, Commander? Zexter's eyes darkened with the weight of memories. He set his cup down slowly, his gaze distant as he recalled the first time he saw the true might of humanity in battle. It was 6 cycles ago, he began, his voice steady but tinged with the horror of the memory. The Coalition discovered Earth, a small blue planet, with too much water and not enough space for its people. Zexter hesitated, we thought humans were too weak. Too soft. We planned to give them simple jobs far from the front lines. He paused, taking a long drink from his cup. The steam curled up around his breathing slits as he continued. My ship, the Swift Claw, was sent to Earth on a diplomatic mission, carrying high-ranking Coalition diplomats. It was supposed to be simple: talk, sign papers, and leave. Zexter's voice darkened as he spoke of the unexpected attack. The swarm had found them. 3 scout ships appeared near Earth's moon, attacking without warning, as they always did. Our ship took heavy damage in the first attack, Zexter said. 2 engine cores were hit. Our weapon systems were failing. The Coalition diplomats were panicking. But the humans? They were different. He recalled how, instead of running or hiding, the humans took charge. They asked questions about the enemy, calculated their responses, and, against all odds, fought back with a ferocity that no one expected. Captain Sarah Chan led the humans. When the swarm boarded, the humans didn't hesitate. They split into 3 teams, 1 for repairs, 1 for evacuation, and 1 to defend the ship, Zexter said, his voice filled with reverence. The swarm thought they had us, but the humans knew something we didn't: adaptability. Zexter's eyes glittered with respect as he spoke of their actions. The humans had no advanced weaponry, yet they used their wits and their resourcefulness to hold off the swarm. Chen, with her knowledge of the ship's design, had even managed to freeze the swarm drones using the ship's coolant pipes. Within minutes, all 12 drones were dead. And not a single human was lost, Zexter concluded, his voice quiet but filled with awe. The officers sat in stunned silence, struggling to process the revelation. Humans don't fight according to the rules, Zexter finished, his voice softer now. They change. They improvise. They do the unexpected. And that is why the swarm fears them. The Swift Claw drifted quietly in the vacuum of space, the stars beyond twinkling with cold indifference. Zexter's mind drifted back to the moment when his beliefs about humanity were irrevocably changed. It had been 6 cycles ago, on a diplomatic mission to Earth, when he first witnessed the potential of the human spirit. At that time, the Galactic Coalition considered humans nothing more than a curiosity, a species too fragile for the brutality of war. Their planet Earth was a small, water-covered orb that seemed to lack the resources and technology to pose a significant threat to the galaxy's dominant forces. The Coalition's strategy was simple: humans were assigned to menial roles far away from the front lines, kept under the radar, far removed from any serious military operations. Zexter had been skeptical of humans. He had watched their leaders sign documents with the Coalition, bowing to the wishes of superior beings, and he had assumed they would cower when faced with true combat. But that assumption was shattered in an instant. It happened near Earth's moon. The swarm, notorious for their surprise attacks, struck without warning. Their ships were fast and deadly, and in an instant, the Swift Claw was engaged in battle. Zexter had always been a calm strategist, but even he could feel the panic creeping into the air as their engines were hit and the ship's systems began to fail. The Swift Claw was a formidable ship, but it was no match for the ferocity of the swarm's assault. Within minutes, they lost 2 engine cores, rendering their ability to move at full speed completely useless. The weapon systems were barely functional, and the Coalition diplomats on board were frantic, unsure of how to respond. They were trained for political dialogue, not warfare, and their voices echoed with panic as they realized the gravity of the situation. But the humans, they didn't panic. Not even for a second. Captain Sarah Chan, a human officer who had been part of the diplomatic delegation, was calm as she watched the chaos unfold around her. Her dark eyes narrowed as she assessed the situation, her mind racing through potential solutions. She turned to Zexter, who had been pacing the command deck, trying to keep control of the deteriorating situation. "Commander," she said, her voice steady, "how many enemies do we have? What weapons do they carry? Which sections of the ship are still functional? Zexter was taken aback by her composed demeanor. He had expected fear, hesitation, but what he saw instead was a clear, rational mind at work. The humans, with their lack of advanced weaponry, their fragile bodies, were asking questions. Tactical questions. For the first time in the battle, Zexter felt a flicker of hope. "Do you want weapons?" Zexter asked, unsure whether to trust her judgment. Chen didn't hesitate. "Yes. We'll need them." The officer from Zexter's team scoffed at the idea. "What good would our weapons do them? They can't even hold our blasters properly with their tiny hands." Zexter didn't respond to the officer's words. He knew that sometimes, when all options had been exhausted, it was better to let others make their own decisions, even if he didn't fully understand them. Against his better judgment, he gave the humans weapons. What happened next shocked Zexter to his core. The humans didn't charge headlong into battle like the other species he had fought alongside. Instead, they did something unexpected: they adapted. As the swarm drones closed in, the humans split into teams. One team worked feverishly to repair the ship's damaged systems. They worked with efficiency that Zexter hadn't thought possible, considering their lack of experience with coalition technology. Another group moved quickly to assist the wounded, organizing makeshift medical areas with whatever supplies they could find. But the most surprising thing, the thing that would haunt Zexter for the rest of his life, was how the humans fought. The swarm drones arrived at the breach in the outer hull, ready to pour into the ship and massacre everyone in sight. The other officers prepared for the worst, certain that it was only a matter of time before the swarm overran them. But instead of waiting for death, Captain Chen and her team took a different approach. They didn't fight the drones head-on. They didn't follow the predictable strategies of their enemies. They adapted. They used the environment to their advantage. Chen quickly assessed the ship's layout, noticing the coolant pipes running through the ceiling near the breach. With a precise shot, she disabled the pipes. The coolant spilled out in thick, freezing jets, instantly freezing 3 of the drones in place. The swarm hadn't anticipated such a tactic. Their drones were built for war, designed to attack, not to think. And humans didn't fight with strength alone. They fought with cunning, with unexpected solutions. Without the use of magnetic boots, which the drones relied on to maintain their footing in zero gravity, the humans moved in ways the swarm couldn't track. They pushed off walls, spun in the air, and fired from changing positions. It was an entirely new kind of combat, a kind that the swarm could not predict. The battle shifted in favor of the humans. In mere minutes, all 12 drones were destroyed, and not a single human soldier had been lost. Zexter watched, astounded, as the humans coordinated flawlessly, each movement fluid and calculated, as if they had trained for this moment their entire lives. They were no longer the fragile beings he had once dismissed. They were warriors in their own right. As Zexter stood there, witnessing the efficiency and adaptability of these strange beings, he realized something that changed his understanding of warfare. Humans didn't fight according to established rules or patterns. They didn't follow the same paths that other species did. They could shift their strategies, adapt, and use their surroundings to their advantage in ways that no one had ever imagined. The swarm had underestimated them, and it had cost them dearly. From that moment forward, Zexter understood that humanity wasn't just a curiosity. They weren't a weak species, too soft for war. They were a force to be reckoned with, unpredictable, adaptable, and capable of overcoming even the most insurmountable odds. And the swarm would soon learn that humanity was a threat they could no longer ignore. Zexter paused in his recounting, his compound eyes narrowing in remembrance. The officers around him were still, their attention rapt. The weight of his words settled in the air, and the once dismissed humans now stood at the center of their thoughts, a force not of destruction, but of survival and ingenuity. As Zexter finished, the silence that followed was profound. The young officers knew that this was just the beginning of the story, a story that would shape the future of the galaxy. The cold, mechanical hum of Proxima Station was interrupted by the rhythmic pulsing of warning lights. Outside, the dark vastness of space stretched on endlessly, but the station's internal corridors were buzzing with tension. The station, once a beacon of hope, had become a fortress under siege. Zexter's voice carried a heavy weight as he began to recount the grim tale of the battle that would test every soldier's spirit. The swarm had arrived without warning, as they always did. Their ships, like shadowed predators, had surrounded the station with a terrifying swiftness, cutting off all avenues of escape. Proxima Station, a vital refueling outpost for the Coalition, had been vulnerable due to its remote location in the galaxy. The Coalition forces, including a small but fierce contingent of 200 humans, had been stationed there, expecting a quiet assignment. Instead, they were trapped, isolated, and vastly outnumbered. The alarm bells rang as the first wave of the swarm's assault cut through the station's defenses. The outer hull groaned under the pressure, and the lights flickered briefly as power was redirected to the emergency shields. Inside, the officers, each from different species of the Coalition, felt the creeping sense of dread. They were prepared for combat, but nothing could have prepared them for this. They had never seen the swarm in full force. As the hours dragged on, the officers' resolve began to falter. The sounds of swarm drones pounding against the station's outer walls became a constant, haunting rhythm. The food reserves were running low. The air was thick with fear. Officers from the Mickle species, known for their mental toughness, found it harder to focus. The Vexter soldiers, once filled with fierce pride, began to exchange nervous glances. Even the Zendan warriors, stalwart and disciplined, felt their resolve weaken. The humans, however, were different. Zexter paused for a moment, remembering the small, flickering lights of hope that the humans brought in the midst of that darkness. He described how the humans, despite the gravity of the situation, began to organize the others. Captain Sarah Chen, the same captain who had fought beside him on Earth, took charge, her voice calm yet firm. "We cannot afford to let our spirits break," Captain Chen said, rallying the humans and non-humans alike. "We are all here together, and we must endure." Zexter watched, astonished, as the humans started to build a routine. They gathered the officers, regardless of species, and began creating games and activities to keep everyone's minds active. Some of the humans used old scraps of metal to fashion makeshift chessboards, while others played music on instruments they had cobbled together from spare parts. Laughter, soft at first, then louder, began to trickle into the station's sterile halls. The humans didn't just create distractions. They also organized their limited food and water reserves with surgical precision. The rationing was strict but fair, ensuring that every soldier had enough to last longer than anyone had expected. Their strategy was methodical, each person taking turns to ensure the most critical systems, air filtration, shield generators, and communication relays, remained operational. While the other species could not understand the humans' resilience, Zexter began to see it for what it truly was: an unshakable resolve, not just to survive, but to endure as a collective. Then, the swarm breached the station. The sound of metal twisting and breaking echoed through the corridors as the swarm's drones tore through the station's outer layers, their alien weapons creating sparks and fire where they hit. The officers braced for the worst. The station's defenses were all but useless now. The Coalition's military commanders began to issue orders to fall back to the central hub, where the last escape ships were waiting. But as Zexter made his way to the command center, he felt a sharp pull in his chest, a sudden realization. The humans were doing something that no one else had the strength to do: they were staying behind. Zexter's voice softened as he recounted the next moment. He had expected the humans to retreat like the others. But Captain Chen and her team, along with a handful of other human soldiers, made a stand in one of the narrow, dimly lit corridors near the breach. There, they would hold the line, preventing the swarm from advancing further. Zexter, unsure of what he was witnessing, watched as the humans took up positions, determined and resolute. "They don't have the weapons or the armor of other species," Zexter reflected aloud, his voice tinged with disbelief. "But they have something more. They have a commitment to one another, a shared will to protect." For hours, they held the line. The swarm's drones advanced in waves, but the humans didn't falter. They fought with a ferocity Zexter had never seen. Each soldier, human and non-human, was fighting not just to protect themselves, but to ensure the safety of their comrades. Zexter observed as the humans used their environment, making clever use of the station's narrow passageways and shadows. They stacked debris in strategic locations, creating barricades from the swarm's own fallen drones. Each human soldier moved with a sense of purpose, their movements swift and calculated, always working as a team. In those hours, Zexter's admiration for the humans grew. He saw something in them that transcended mere survival. It was a willingness to sacrifice for the greater good, a profound sense of duty that went beyond personal gain. He had expected them to break under pressure, but instead, they held fast, every man and woman determined to give their comrades a chance at escape. When the final wave of drones was defeated, the station was left in ruins. The survivors, many gravely wounded, had fought for longer than anyone could have anticipated. Zexter walked through the narrow corridor, now littered with the bodies of fallen drones. The human soldiers who had stayed behind were barely recognizable, their faces streaked with blood and soot, but there was something in their eyes, something that made Zexter pause. He approached Captain Chen, who was lying against a wall, her arm wrapped in makeshift bandages. Despite her injuries, she smiled faintly as Zexter knelt beside her. "You've done it," Zexter said quietly, his voice filled with awe. "You've saved us all." Chen's smile widened, though she winced from the pain. "We did it together," she replied, her voice still steady despite her exhaustion. "Mission accomplished." Zexter looked around the corridor, now littered with debris and the remnants of battle, and for the first time, he understood what made humanity so different. It wasn't their physical strength or advanced technology. It was their heart, their unyielding spirit to protect, to fight not for victory, but for each other. The humans had saved the coalition, not through their weapons, but through their indomitable will to never give up. The silence that followed spoke volumes to Zexter. In that moment, he knew that the humans, despite their fragility, would forever change the course of this war. The coalition had underestimated them. And it would be the swarm's greatest mistake. Zexter leaned forward, his compound eyes reflecting the dim light of the officers' lounge as he continued to share his awe-inspiring tale. His voice, usually firm and unwavering, carried a hint of disbelief as he recounted the details of an operation unlike any he had ever witnessed before. The operation had been called Operation Longunt, and it would show Zexter just how unpredictable, and profoundly dangerous, humanity could be. "Imagine this," Zexter began, his voice low and filled with intrigue. "A small force of 30 human soldiers, far from the front lines, on a moon far from civilization, deep within swarm-controlled territory. Their orders were not to engage in combat, not to attack. Their mission was to follow." The officers sitting around him exchanged confused glances. A mission to follow the enemy without engaging? It was a tactic that sounded like madness, especially given the ruthless efficiency of the swarm. The swarm, after all, were not only formidable in combat, they were a hive mind, linked by a collective consciousness that allowed them to strategize and adapt quickly. For any species to follow them without striking would be an unthinkable risk. But that was exactly what the humans did. Zexter described the moon, a barren rock bathed in the light of a distant star. The surface was jagged and scarred, with vast, desolate plains broken by mountains of stone. It was the perfect place for the swarm to make a stronghold, yet the humans had landed with nothing but their wits and the most basic of equipment. They did not prepare for battle, they simply followed. They did not engage the enemy in open combat, even when they had the perfect opportunity. Instead, they tracked the swarm, staying just out of visual range, like shadows in the night. "They moved in the silence of the void," Zexter said. "The humans did not rush. They did not panic. They simply observed, patiently waiting for the swarm to make their next move." The officers were captivated, leaning in closer as Zexter continued. Every step was calculated. The humans stayed just beyond the swarm's detection range, careful to remain hidden from the drone patrols. The swarm, used to the aggressive tactics of other species, didn't know how to respond. At first, they were cautious. They believed they were being watched, but they couldn't find the source. The humans didn't fight. They didn't show their hand. They just followed. Zexter paused, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The concept was so foreign to his mind, to the mind of any seasoned warrior. Warfare had always been about direct conflict, about strategy, aggression, and dominance. What the humans were doing was something completely different: psychological warfare, played out with patience, precision, and a deep understanding of their enemy's behavior. The swarm, whose strength lies in their hive mind and their predictable, relentless strategies, were confused. They were not accustomed to being hunted. The swarm's tactics are designed for a direct attack. They strike quickly, overwhelm their opponents, and move on. They never imagined that anyone would simply follow them, observing their every move without giving chase. As Zexter continued to describe the operation, he marveled at the complexity of the human strategy. The swarm, who had always fought to win quickly or die trying, began to crack under the pressure of being followed, yet never confronted. The humans did not rush into battle. They did not make their presence known in any way that would trigger the swarm's aggressive response. Instead, they forced the swarm into a position where they began to doubt their own tactics. The more the swarm tried to outmaneuver the humans, the more they exposed their weaknesses. Zexter's voice lowered with reverence. The humans didn't need to fight. They understood something fundamental about their enemy, something no one had ever considered. They knew that sometimes, the greatest weapon isn't physical force. It's making your enemy question themselves. The swarm, unable to comprehend why they were being followed without being attacked, began to fracture. Their communications started to break down. Their patrols grew disorganized. And the more they tried to hunt the humans, the more they were led into traps of their own making. Zexter's eyes glinted with respect as he recalled how, over time, the swarm's hive mind began to lose its coherence. The humans' persistent following, combined with their silence, disturbed the swarm's tactical operations. They became so unsettled by the invisible presence of the humans that their communications network began to unravel. The drones, once efficient and unstoppable, began to abandon their posts, leaving key positions undefended. Their once coordinated attacks began to fall apart. Zexter took a deep breath, his words becoming more charged with awe. By the end of the operation, the swarm was in disarray. They didn't retreat out of fear of the human strength. No, they retreated because the humans had made them question their own strength. For 7 days, the humans had done nothing but follow. And by the 8th day, the swarm ships began to leave. Without a single shot fired, the humans had turned the tide of an entire operation. They made the swarm abandon a position of strategic value. Without a battle, without bloodshed, they had won. Zexter paused, his mind racing with the implications of what he had witnessed. The young officers around him were silent, their faces a mixture of shock and wonder. Zexter could see that they, too, were beginning to understand the magnitude of the humans' actions. The swarm had underestimated them, Zexter continued. They thought they could outmatch the humans in combat. But the humans did not play by the same rules. They did not fight in the way the swarm expected. They fought with the mind, not the weapon. And in doing so, they exploited the very thing that made the swarm so dangerous, their predictability. Zexter leaned back in his chair, his voice now softer, filled with a mix of admiration and respect. This is humanity's true strength. Not their weapons, not their technology, but their ability to adapt. To think. To understand the mind of their enemy, and use that understanding to win without violence. As the officers sat in stunned silence, Zexter's words hung in the air. The galaxy was vast, and war had long been the way of the universe, but humans had brought something new to the battlefield, something that no one had ever anticipated. And that, Zexter knew, was the key to their success. Zexter's voice lowered as he entered the final chapter of his recounting, his eyes distant, reflecting the weight of the stories he had shared. The young officers around him were now completely still, hanging on his every word, sensing that the most important lesson was about to unfold. He began to speak of a place few in the coalition had dared to approach, the human colony on Epsilon Indi. It was a small settlement isolated and quiet, yet it became the site of one of the most shocking turnarounds in the war. The swarm, Zexter began, attacked Epsilon Indi with the same ferocity they brought to every other world they sought to conquer. They overwhelmed the planet quickly, as they always did, sweeping through the human settlements before the coalition even had a chance to react. By the time we arrived, the swarm had taken full control of the planet, leaving no safe zones, only destruction. The officers leaned in, eager to hear how the humans could have possibly turned such a disastrous situation around. Zexter continued, the mystery of what had happened on Epsilon Indi still fresh in his mind. But when we landed, Zexter said, we found something unexpected. Something that made my respect for humans go far beyond what I had seen in battle. He paused for a moment, his voice filled with both awe and caution. The humans had done something that no one could have imagined. They had captured live swarm drones, one of the most dangerous, relentless enemies we had ever encountered, and studied them. Zexter's eyes flickered with disbelief as he recalled the sight. The humans, who had once been seen as weak, fragile beings, had broken down the swarm's technology. They studied the drones, learned their weaknesses, and found ways to disrupt their communication network. A hushed silence filled the room as Zexter's words sank in. The officers, who had once thought of the swarm as invincible, now realized the unimaginable. Humans had turned their own enemies' weapons against them. Imagine this, Zexter continued, his voice heavy with thought. The swarm's drones, meant to strike fear into the hearts of all who faced them, were no longer unstoppable. The humans didn't just fight them with weapons. They used their intellect, their capacity for adaptation, to understand their enemy from the inside out. He shook his head in disbelief. And this wasn't some grand military operation. These humans were civilians, farmers, scientists, who had never faced a battle of this scale. They were simply trying to survive, protect their families. But when their homes were attacked, they did whatever it took to defend them. Zexter paused again, his voice growing solemn. He had seen firsthand how humanity fought with a sense of purpose far beyond mere survival. It was something the other species of the coalition, including himself, had never fully understood until that moment. They fight for their homes, Zexter said, his voice thick with the weight of the realization. They fight for each other, not for victory. They fight because their survival, their very way of life, is at stake. And when that happens, they will become whatever they need to be: warriors, scientists, tacticians. They will transcend their limits and do what others cannot even imagine. The room was still, the officers processing what they had just heard. Zexter's final words left a lasting impact on them, an understanding that humanity was not just a species to be feared on the battlefield, but one whose spirit and determination could reshape the galaxy itself. Zexter's voice softened as he looked out at the stars through the viewport. There's something that frightens me about humans, he continued, his tone almost reverent. They are capable of incredible violence, far more than any species in the coalition. But they are also capable of extraordinary compassion, of sacrifice beyond anything I have ever witnessed. He turned back to the officers, his compound eyes focusing on each one. That duality, violence and compassion, is what makes them unpredictable. It's why the swarm is retreating for the first time in 1,000 years. But it's also why we must understand them fully. Because when the war ends, when the swarm is defeated, what will happen to the humans? What role will they play in the galaxy then? Will they fight each other? Will they fight us? Will they become something else entirely? The officers sat in stunned silence, feeling the weight of Zexter's words. For the first time, they truly understood the depth of humanity's potential, both its terrifying power and its profound kindness. Zexter's voice dropped to a whisper. We are winning this war because of humans. But the real question remains, after the war, what happens when they no longer have a war to fight? Zexter's gaze remained fixed on the stars outside, his mind drifting to the uncertainty of what lay ahead. For the first time in his long career, Zexter found himself deeply troubled by the implications of humanity's rise in the galaxy. What had begun as a curious and unpredictable species had now become a force that could alter the very fabric of the universe. The officers, who had once seen the humans as nothing more than a weak species, now recognized them as something far more complex and dangerous. The war might be coming to an end, but the legacy of humanity, its unpredictability, its adaptability, would echo for centuries to come. Zexter's final words resonated in the minds of the officers. Humans are dangerous, yes. But their greatest strength is their ability to change. As the room grew silent, the young officers could only stare out at the infinite expanse of space, lost in thought. The war was drawing to a close, but the mystery of humanity, its potential for both destruction and creation, was just beginning. The future of the galaxy would be shaped by the choices humanity made, and no one, not even Zexter, could predict where that path would lead. As the war draws to a close, humanity's true strength has been revealed. Through unexpected resilience, adaptability, and unwavering sacrifice, humans have proven that they are not just survivors, they are the galaxy's greatest force. The swarm's retreat is only the beginning. What happens next? The future is uncertain, but one thing is clear: humanity's role in the galaxy will never be the same. Now, the question remains: can the galaxy truly understand the power of humanity, or will we continue to surprise them all? What lies ahead is a story still to be written. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. What do you think humanity's next move should be in this vast universe? Share your thoughts below, and join us for more incredible stories from the stars.